Welcome to Rooted and Rising Healing. I'm your host, Hali, and this space is for women rebuilding after betrayal. Here we make sense of what happened, find truth again, and reconnect with who you really are beyond the pain. Whether you're staying, leaving, or still in the middle, your story matters. Together, we'll explore truth, clarity, and the quiet courage it takes to rise from the wreckage of what was into the wholeness of who you're becoming. You're safe to be here. In the messy middle, in the rebuilding, and in the rising. Let's begin. Thank you for joining me today on this episode of the Rooted and Rising After Betrayal podcast. I'm your host, Hali. And long before betrayal ever happened in our adult relationships, many of us were already experts at surviving relational pain. These survival patterns that show up in our relationships today often have roots that are rooted in childhood, when we learned how to earn love or avoid conflict or stay safe in a world that sometimes might have felt unpredictable. So as you think about these patterns and how they helped you survive when you were younger, I want you to consider that maybe they're not actually meant to guide us now. And so healing is the opportunity to honor where they came from and to choose something new. Today, we're going to talk about different relational survival patterns, where they come from, how they show up today, and what it looks like to heal them. And sometimes this is going to be uncomfortable because growth oftentimes is uncomfortable. And healing asks us to get uncomfortable, to let go of the old protection so that we can rise into new patterns of wholeness and healing. So even if you had what you might consider an ideal childhood or a good upbringing, a childhood upbringing where you felt safe in your home, many of us were exposed to relational survival patterns that aren't actually that healthy. And if you were in a home where there was abuse or abandonment or divorce or anything where there was some obvious dysfunction, you likely picked up patterns along the way that helped you to survive or keep yourself safe. As children, we learn what safety looks like by watching the people that we depend on. So if you had a parent who was constantly over-functioning to make sure that they were okay, you might have picked up along the way that that's how you needed to keep yourself safe. If love felt conditional or unpredictable or unsafe for any reason, then as a child, you likely learned how to adapt. You probably learned how to be hyper aware, to please other people, to fix people's problems, or maybe even to disappear so that you could avoid the dysfunction. Or maybe you were taught that you needed to do more or achieve more to be accepted, to be loved, to be valued. And so if we think about it, these adaptations that we picked up when we were younger really were brilliant, right? It's the body's way of saying, stay safe, stay connected. And as a child, those patterns became protection to us. And as many of us do, we bring these childhood patterns into our adult relationships because we don't know anything different. Why would we know anything different if that's what we saw modeled growing up? So you might not connect with every single pattern of protection that I'm going to talk about today, but maybe parts of it and pieces of it will connect with your experience and your story. Some of those childhood patterns that might be showing up in your adult life, like hypervigilance as a child, might show up as anxiety. If you overfunctioned as a child and you continue to do that in your adult relationships, you might notice that you carry a lot of resentment. If you were taught that emotions weren't actually safe or that it wasn't okay, you might suppress your emotions now, which will cause disconnection from your true authentic self. And so when you experience betrayal trauma, it's not really usually where these patterns are created, it's where they become exposed. And so today we're going to talk about the oftentimes childhood root to some of these patterns of protection, how they show up as adults, and what we can do to shift out of them now that we're in this realm of healing and everything has been exposed. It's kind of like we've been broken open and are being forced to kind of look at our old patterns of the past that may not actually serve us well. So let's start with hypervigilance. This is such a common behavior after betrayal. You might find yourself like scanning for your partner's tone, for any sense of the energy being off. You might analyze every word. You might find yourself wanting to check their phone or their emails, anything to look for a sign of danger, because your nervous system is trying to protect pain before it happens. So this can come on as a result of betrayal, but it also might have a deeper root if you grew up in a home where the emotional temperature changed quickly, where you learned how to read the room to avoid punishment or rejection or chaos. And so if this pattern has a childhood root for you, it might be amplified in betrayal. And so what can we do to shift out of that? First of all, we have to recognize that this is what's happening, that my body is searching for safety, not necessarily proof. And so how can we practice some self-soothing to get into that grounded state that I've been talking about, to check in with your body and see what the message is that it has for you? And then reminding yourself, changing the inner dialogue of, I can handle what is true. Denial is such a big piece sometimes of the grief cycle that can show up after betrayal. So reminding yourself that I can handle what is true. True safety actually comes not from controlling everything, but from having the self-trust and the clarity. And so I talk to a lot of women, and oftentimes I hear something along the lines of, I can handle the truth. What I can't handle is continuing to be lied to over and over again. I can handle the reality of what the truth is, but what I can't handle is the repeated misconceptions, the lies, the deception, the betrayal. And so remind yourself that I actually can handle what is true. I may not like what is true, and I may not wish that it was my reality, but I can handle truth, and I want that clarity for myself. So let's talk about becoming over-attached to a relationship outcome. So maybe as a child, your sense of worth felt like it was tied to keeping peace or meeting other people's needs. In a sense, if everybody else was okay, then I'm okay. And that can very much come back up again after betrayal. If you feel driven to fix or to rescue or to, in many different ways, prove your value in the relationship, you might equate stability with safety, even if that stability costs your self-worth. And so how can we shift out of this unhealthy, destructive pattern of needing everybody else to be okay in order for me to be okay? If you think about shifting from control to curiosity, even just giving your brain the possibility that what if my worth actually doesn't depend on whether this relationship survives? What if my worth is not dependent on whether or not someone else understands me or sees my pain or understands my pain? Because honestly, unless someone goes through betrayal themselves, they probably aren't going to understand your pain. And even if they have gone through betrayal, it's not the same as yours. And so waiting and hoping for somebody else to understand your pain, you might be waiting for a long time. What if my worth and my value isn't centered on that? But what if we could recenter that energy on your own healing and your own growth, and then let the outcomes unfold while you stay true to yourself, while you honor your boundaries? So a reminder that healing is not dependent on anybody else's choices or the way somebody else heals themselves, whether they do or whether they don't. and whether or not they can show up for me in a way that would feel safe. Another pattern that many of us pick up in earlier life is to suppress our emotions. I don't know about you, but I didn't have a lot of emotional awareness or emotional intelligence coming into my adulthood. We didn't have a lot of talk about emotions growing up, and I don't fault my parents for that. They didn't know how to do it either. But I wasn't really taught about emotions, and I think I could identify like 3 big ones: mad, sad, or happy. And I didn't know how to get underneath any of those. And so maybe you were taught that emotions were inconvenient, or maybe it wasn't safe for you to have emotions because then maybe you were told to go to your room or to stop crying or to get over it or to stop making a big deal out of things. Maybe you were told that you were too much. So sometimes your big feelings might have been met with silence because maybe your parents didn't know how to deal with it, or shame, or maybe even rejection. And so now, as an adult, if you carry that into adulthood, you might now find yourself minimizing your own pain to keep the peace. You might avoid tears or anger, believing that if you allow that to be seen, that you might push somebody else away. And so how can we shift out of that? Creating safe spaces for your full emotional expression. And we've talked about a few tools and ways that you can do that through coaching or therapy, getting out a pen and a paper. I love breath work, having trusted friends and trusted support people that aren't going to judge you or try to tell you that your feelings or your emotions are not okay. And then that internal dialogue is the reminder that, I was made to have emotions, and it's okay for me to feel all of this. All of me, all of my emotions are welcome and okay. And even the messy parts, they have a message for us and we can honor them. Reminding yourself that emotions aren't actually weakness, it's wisdom. And so feeling fully is how you can step into reclaiming that humanity part of yourself. And even if emotional expression was not okay growing up, you can reparent yourself now to honor your emotions. And you can now model that for other people in your circle of influence. This is one of the things I love about this healing work, is that we can break out of these generational patterns and generational cycles. And if you have children in your circle of influence, or even other family members, even adults, my kids are adults now, and I feel like we're modeling and stepping out of old patterns, and this being one of them, of emotions not being okay or not being safe to express. And so you can model and break out of these old unhealthy patterns, not only for yourself, but you can change those within your circle of influence, or at least influence them for the good as you model something different. Another pattern that many of us brought with us into adulthood was this pattern of self-blame or internalized shame. So we might take on responsibility for things that are not even ours to control. So maybe a parent's mood. If you had divorce in your family, you might have been tempted to look at how something you did might have contributed to that, or conflict, or neglect. Sometimes as a child, it feels a lot safer to believe that this must be my fault, because if it's my fault, then maybe I can change it. Maybe I can fix it. And that feels safer than to believe that we have no power in it. So of course we pick up that idea of self-blame or internalized shame to take it on, because as a child, we felt like that is what was going to keep us safe, or that gave us any sense of control, even though in reality, we were powerless in those situations. But if you bring that pattern into adulthood, and your default is to self-blame when things go wrong, then when you experience betrayal trauma, that is so quick to trigger that old script of, if I were enough, this wouldn't have happened. Or if maybe I had just done this, or if I hadn't done that, or if maybe I said something different or did something different. So that makes sense too, because if it's our fault, then I can fix it. I can change it. I can prevent it from happening again. And that really isn't reality either. So how do we shift out of that? And it starts with naming betrayal as a violation of your dignity, not a reflection of your worth. This was a violation of your dignity and your rights. Can we practice that radical self-compassion? I think I talked about fierce self-compassion a couple episodes ago. This was done to me, not because of me. Okay? So this was something that happened to me. It's not something that I caused. And I'll just remind you that even though this was done to you, we still are responsible to do the work to heal from it. So it's not our fault, and it's our responsibility to do the healing work. I hate the injustice of that. And it's true. I wish our spouse could be the one that could come and pour this healing balm over you that would make it all go away. And it's not possible. Even if they step into recovery and relational repair and they show up safer and they take accountability and all of that, they still can't take away the pain. It's our job to do the work to heal. So begin with replacing shame with truth, reminding yourself that you are inherently worthy and lovable, and this isn't your fault. And I will take responsibility. I will use my agency to do the work to heal through this. Another pattern that many of us might have brought into adulthood is overfunctioning to make sure we hold it all together. So sometimes your order in the family of origin has an impact on this, but you may have grown up as the responsible one. Or you might have had a parent who struggled with addiction or mental illness, or they worked a lot, or maybe you were raised by a single parent, and so you might have become the caretaker or the achiever. Or maybe you had one parent who had a hard time controlling their emotions, and you might have become the peacemaker, the peacekeeper, where you put yourself in the middle of everybody else's stuff to try and attempt to hold it all together for everybody else. As a child, that makes sense why we do that. We want everything to be okay. If we can get out in front of that dysfunctional behavior and we can take care of everything, or we can keep the peace, then it keeps us safe, right? As adults, when we have that pattern of survival, when crisis hits, you might find yourself pushing through the exhaustion. You might believe that everything depends on you. You might think that asking for help feels like weak or unsafe, or you might find yourself trying to manage your spouse's recovery, making sure that they get to their appointments or make the appointments or find the right coach or find the right program or therapist. You might put yourself in that responsibility and in that role. And actually, it's more helpful to remind ourselves that, if you look at your spouse, it's probably a pretty good chance they are functional in other areas of their life, and they can be functional in this as well. And of course, we want to make sure that they're doing all the right things. We sometimes think we have the right answer for them, that we know what they should do, and we can see it. It seems like the path is clear to us. But if we put ourselves in that role, that is actually keeping us in a pattern of dysfunction. And it's actually a lot more helpful for your spouse to take that role on themselves, to find their own work. And if they refuse to do that, as painful and as hard and as difficult as that is to see, that is good information for us that we need to know. Remember that we can handle the truth. We might need to see the truth that they're unwilling to do the work to find recovery, that they're either unwilling or unable to get into a better, healthier place where they can create safety. And again, I would rather have the truth than to have something that is distorted because I feel like I'm controlling it, even though they're not making the efforts to do it. So how do we shift out of this? It's going to be different in every situation and maybe even in different parts of your life. But think about the areas of your life where you can delegate to somebody else. And delegating your husband's or your spouse's recovery work to them is 100% a really good thing to do. Even if it feels vulnerable, let's sit back and watch and see what they're willing to do without us pushing or pulling or dragging them to do what we think they need to do. Also, can you be willing to receive support? Can you be willing to give yourself rest? Rest is not failure. It doesn't mean you're not doing anything. It's nervous system repair, and we need it. Can you remind yourself that it's okay to let go? I actually can't control his recovery. I can't control what he does or doesn't do. And I can reach out so I don't have to do this alone myself. Sometimes in recovery for our own healing, we have to learn to just be held by other people and not just be the ones to always hold responsibility, hold pain, hold choices, hold everything for everybody else. And so can you start to shift out of that, reminding yourself that it's okay for me to let go. I need to let them do this work on their own, and I need to focus on what I have control of, and I need to do what is going to be best for me right now. And as I watch and observe whether or not they're going to step into recovery. Okay, so another pattern of behavior I want to just touch on is our loss of identity. So if you grew up adapting to other people's needs, you might have learned to silence your own. So you might have become who you needed to be to belong. And sometimes this has roots in our home that might have actually spilled out into our teenage relationships, our teenage experience, where do you ever find yourself doing things that maybe you didn't actually want to do because you wanted to be accepted? This can carry into adulthood. And even I think of like stepping out of dysfunctional family patterns. Sometimes we stay in our dysfunctional family patterns because that's where we felt like we belonged, of course, because that's where we were raised in. And stepping out of that dysfunctional pattern doesn't actually mean you don't belong to that family. It means you don't belong to that dysfunction. And you'll probably hear me say this a lot, but one person can break a pattern if you step out of your part in that. So how does this show up after betrayal? You might feel completely lost because maybe your identity was built around the relationship and the relationship surviving, not necessarily your authentic selfhood. And so this betrayal can literally sometimes just crack you open to the point where you have to really take a look at who you are and what you value and what your rights are and what your voice sounds like. And are your thoughts and your ideas your own, or are you picking up someone else's? Are you still living in all of the belief systems that you brought with you from childhood, whether that be from family of origin, culture, religion, school, education, all those things? And do they align with who you are and who you want to be? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next episode or two. So can you connect or reconnect, maybe connect for the first time, or maybe reconnect to your values, your body, and your voice? Can you explore what you love? What brings you life? What makes you feel like you? What brings you joy? So you can begin writing a new story that's not centered on this pain, but centered on authenticity and on purpose. So reminding yourself that I'm returning to myself, to the person I was always meant to be, and I'm breaking out of these old cycles. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I want to just remind you that as you step out of these cycles by identifying them, having compassion for where they came from, and then interrupting these patterns, you're not just healing for yourself, but you're interrupting generational patterns, which can be a benefit and a blessing to if you still have children, or if you have children in your circle of influence, or siblings, or other people in your circle of influence. You are breaking out of those patterns, and you're not just healing for you, but you're healing for others. And I love the vision of that. So every time you choose truth over appeasement, rest over functioning, or emotional expression over suppression, you're actually rewriting the story for those who come after you, as well as for yourself. So remember that this is sacred work. You're not betraying your younger self or your family of origin or your culture. You're actually evolving yourself and everyone that comes after you. And I love that idea of continual evolving and continual growth. So I just want to remind you that you didn't choose the environment that shaped your survival patterns, but you can choose the healing that transforms and helps you grow out of those. So I just want to remind you as well that growth sometimes can feel unsafe because a lot of times our nervous system equates familiar things with safe things, but safety doesn't necessarily mean the same. So if you feel uncomfortable or your nervous system is feeling uncomfortable, just remember that that discomfort can actually be a signal that you're breaking out of generational cycles. So growth oftentimes does feel uncomfortable, but the discomfort is a sign of freedom and not failure. So also, as you grow, some other people will likely get uncomfortable along with you. And that's okay, because the discomfort that other people are experiencing might be you stepping out of that old pattern or setting a new boundary. And so agency for us can look like setting a boundary, even when it's scary or your voice is shaking, resting, even if an old pattern says, no, push harder, push harder. I struggle with this one. Sometimes I have to have like a little powwow with all the parts in my head and say, you know what? I know we got all those things to do. And right now, the only thing we have to do is to rest. We're right here. We're going to rest. And that's what's on the agenda, is resting. And so healing can also look like telling the truth, even if it makes other people uncomfortable or that they don't like it. So while we didn't consciously create these patterns, we can choose to outgrow them consciously. And just remember that healing doesn't mean shaming the part of you that protected you. It means thanking that younger version of yourself and letting her rest and giving her compassion. So I hope that you can find some compassion for where you learned to survive so bravely, so instinctively as a younger version of yourself. But survival isn't enough today. And in our wise adult version of ourselves, we can rise, we can live from truth, we can live from wholeness and not fear. So you can't go back and give your younger version of yourself the safety that she needed, but you can become that safe place for her now. And that's what this healing journey is all about. And I'm so glad that you joined me today. I hope you'll stay with me next week as we continue to look at ways we can step out of patterns and continue to rise into the next version of yourself. We'll see you next week. Thank you for being here with me inside Rooted and Rising Healing. Remember, healing isn't a destination. It's a returning to your truth, to your voice, to the woman you were always meant to be. You have the power to rise at your own pace, in your own way. And when it feels hard, just come back to your breath and remind yourself, still I rise. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love if you shared it with another sister on the journey. And until next time, stay rooted, stay rising. You've got this.